Hey, I'm Shauna Faye, and today I've got another tutorial for you guys. Today I'm going to be demonstrating how I like to paint this flaming skull design. I want to say thank you guys so much for 600 subscribers. If you're new here, I'm a face painter and I like to make videos all about face painting. If you like to learn about face painting, or if you just like to watch someone paint, then feel free to subscribe. Leave all your questions and comments in the comment section down below. And let's go ahead and get started with the tutorial. I'm starting by loading up some Kryvalline White on a high density sponge. This one is Paint Pal from Silly Farm. I like to start mapping out my skull by placing it first on the high points of the face. So that's going to be the cheekbone, the brow area, the mouth and the nose. And I'm just making sure those areas are covered really well. And once I have all those areas laid down, I'm going to start connecting them. So I'm going to start connecting the cheekbone to the nose and to the mouth as well. And here I'll go ahead and connect the cheekbones to the eyes, just kind of framing around the eyes. Then I'm just going to fill in the forehead space here. I'm going to go over the high points of the face one more time by pouncing the sponge instead of swiping it. Pouncing it is going to give it a little bit more opacity. Realistically, on a skull, these areas that we're making brighter are going to be sticking out, where the rest is going to be kind of sinking into the skin. We're not painting a realistic skull this time, so it's not super important. So this is what the white base should look like. I'm making sure to leave out the areas right here around my mouth and by my temples. I'm going to be doing some shading there later. Now I'm loading up Global Firefly. I will link all the products that I'm using in the description down below. And I'm painting some flames by just doing some C shapes and different variations. I will go through this in depth at the very end, so I'm just going to go through this part pretty quick. Then I just reloaded and I'm just going to go over the colors one more time to just make them super bright. Now I'm going to load up the other side of my sponge with neon yellow. The goal here is to stipple yellow in between the orange and the white, but my sponge was a little too wet and that resulted in covering up a little too much of the orange, but I'll fix that later. Here I'm flipping my sponge and blending the yellow into the white base. To fix that orange, I'm just going to reload my brush and go over the strokes again, and then I'm just going to blend that in using a drier consistency of yellow. I'm moving on to the line work now, so I'm just going to start off with the eyes. I'm just putting down my brush here where my eyebrow starts. I'm putting a decent amount of pressure on the brush, and then I'm just going to release that pressure and flick up. Now I'm placing my brush down with very little pressure and then adding pressure while I bring it up in a curved motion towards the outer corner of the eye. And I'm going to do that same thing, put down pressure and then flick out for all of these small lines around the eyes. And a little trick here is whoever you're painting on, you can have them scrunch their eyes and you'll see where their natural wrinkles are and you can just follow those lines. And here for the outer corners, I just like to do 2 flicks. The nose is basically a tiger stripe motion, so thin to thick to thin. To start the teeth, I like to find the middle of my Cupid's bow. So I'm going to do that technique again where I press down, pull up, and release pressure. And while I'm flicking, I'm also moving my brush to the left and to the right to make the tips of the teeth. As I get to the corners of my mouth, I'm just making the teeth a little smaller. Now outlining the rest of the skull, I'm going to start at the flame. I'm going to come down with my brush and then I'm going to curve in at the space that we left around the temples. Then I'll bring my brush back out for the cheekbones and then curve up and in one more time to connect with the mouth. And I'm going over these areas really quick just to make sure there's enough paint to blend out later. This step is totally optional. I usually don't do it on the job, but I'm just going to outline the flames just lightly. Now I'm just getting my blending brush a little damp for shading. I like to spray my brush a couple of times and then test out the consistency and remove any excess water on my hand, just like that. Now I'm just going to start tapping at the very edge of that line between the black and where the white is. And I'm just going to keep tapping to blend that color out. I'm going to bring the shading down to the inner corners of the eyes, and then I'm just going to kind of extend some of those lines that we created earlier. And this is a good stopping point, especially if you have a little one who doesn't like to have their eyes covered in paint. I am going to go ahead and fill in my eyes using some Global Black on a more rounded sponge. This is a Kryvalline Never Stain sponge. And I'm slightly pinching it so I have a lot of control. And I'm just going right underneath that blending. You can always take that black line when we're outlining the eyes and you can bring that down a little bit to make it a little bit easier, since we really want to make sure to get underneath the black line and not on top at all. And here I'm just pinching my sponge quite a bit to get into these inner corners. And this is another good stopping point. This is usually where I stop. Now I've got a Flora flat brush. I'm going to load that up with some Mehron White. I'm going to just stamp this in where the teeth are. Normally I prefer to use Superstar for this because it's a little bit brighter. I try to use glycerin-based paints on the mouth, and I don't have Superstar right now, so I'll just use some Mehron, and I'll just have to go over that a few times. Now using the same blending technique that I did for the eyes, I'm just going to blend out those areas that I left hollow. So I have a towel on my lap here, and when my brush gets a little bit too pigmented, I just basically take off the excess pigment on that towel and then just keep going. The goal here is to make kind of a gradient from black to gray to your skin tone. There was a little too much black here, so I'm just using the dampness of my brush to kind of activate that paint, and then I'm just wiping it away with my finger and then wiping my hand on a towel. This part's optional, but I just decided to kind of extend some of that shading in towards the teeth. I'm shading in the nose just a little bit, extending out these brow lines, and then extending up these lines to connect with the fire. I pretty much never take the time to do this on the job, but I'm just taking a small blending brush and just blending out around the teeth. And now I'm just going over everything. I'm just going to even out the blending here and crispen up some of the lines. If I have the time and I'm painting on myself at home, I do a lot of quality checks like this. Usually on the job, if I have time, I'll do just like one quality check. I decided to add a little bit of glitter. This is a Creative Faces glitter stick, and I'm just adding some of this orange glitter just to the orange parts of the fire. And here is our fierce flaming skull design. I hope that you guys liked it. So let's go over what practicing some of these techniques would look like. So for the flame, I'm putting my brush down, I'm coming up to a small point, coming back down in a C shape, and then up and to the left, coming back down in a C shape, and then up and to the right. Then I'll do one more C shape and point it just up straight. And I'm going to do that same thing in reverse. It's really important here not to pivot the brush, but to move the entire brush as you're making the shapes. Now for the stippling technique, I'm just going to spray my sponge literally just 2 times. Then I like to just squeeze the sponge to kind of distribute the water. Then I'll just really quickly run my sponge through the cake, and this is going to help me get that perfect consistency. And I'm a little out of frame. Here we go. So basically I'm just stippling right at the edge of that orange, which makes the flames almost look like they're crackling. So for this brow, we want to just kind of practice making this sort of S shape. And we want to practice making thick to thin lines with that flicking motion. If I have too much paint on the tip of my brush to make a thin line, then I like to take it off by doing this little motion here. So now that my brush is ready, I'm going to hold it perpendicular to my skin. This helps me get a thinner line. Then as I go, I'm just going to press my brush down on its side and then back up perpendicular on its tip. And here's a close-up of the teeth. You might have noticed how often I do this pressing and then releasing of pressure. I do it almost constantly when I'm painting. Being able to control the pressure of the brush is really just essential for any line work. So it's important to practice these techniques on the face as well, especially the technique of the teeth. So here I accidentally came down a little bit too straight. It needs to be at an angle, so I'm just going to fix that real quick. So I'm going to show this blending technique one more time. All right, so I sped up this clip just a little bit. I want to show you guys basically in real time how to shade. It does take a little while. Usually I don't do this on the job. I am working on kind of creating a technique using 1-strokes doing shading. That way I can shade immediately. But for now, this is the way that I do it. And I just want to show you guys because I do use it pretty often. Not usually on the job because it does take a while, but it is a good technique to have down. Alright, that's it for this tutorial. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked it, then feel free to hit that like button. I know it's a little late in the year for a Halloween design, although this one can be good all year round. I definitely paint it all year round. I am working on a better upload schedule, so I should be uploading once a month, and I'll definitely have my next year's Halloween tutorial up a lot earlier. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.